The relationship with Dean ends in 1956. The partnership ends in 1956.
10 years to the day.
To the day.
Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were the biggest comedy team in the 1950s, selling out America and printing money with hit films, radio, and nightclub runs. At their peak, they were pulling in an insane $50 million a year. But behind the scenes, the partnership was cracking like a perfect house with a rotten foundation. They met in 1945 and exploded almost instantly, with Dean as the cool crooner and Jerry as the manic wrecking ball. And that dangerous improv chemistry made audiences obsessed. But the fame brought pressure, ego, and control fights that kept growing until the tension turned poisonous and they stopped speaking for 20 full years. By 1956, the act that looked effortless in public was a pressure cooker in private, and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were still making millions while the partnership rotted from the inside out. On the set of Hollywood or Bust, the tension turned so poisonous that Lewis later admitted he couldn't even tell Martin what he really thought, so director Frank Tashlin absorbed the blow-ups instead. They'd shoot scenes together with that famous chemistry, then instantly split to opposite ends of the set, refusing eye contact while the crew felt the hostility in every single take. Assistants were warned not to say one man's name around the other, yet they still had to stand inches apart and sell laughs like nothing was wrong. The quote that ended everything. Then came the line that made the breakup feel less like business and more like personal war. In his memoir, Lewis wrote that Martin finally snapped during one of their fights and told him, "You're nothing to me but a freaking dollar sign." That's not teasing or a joke gone wrong or heat-of-the-moment anger. That's a partner saying the friendship was always fake. The entire partnership was just business. The only thing that mattered was the cash they were generating. Once words like that get said, you don't patch it up with a handshake or an apology or time apart. Lewis carried that quote with him for decades, like a scar that never healed. It became the defining moment when he realized their entire partnership had been a lie from Martin's perspective. Martin allegedly said it during a heated argument about creative control and who got top billing. The fact that Lewis remembered the exact wording 40 years later tells you how deep it cut. That single sentence destroyed whatever goodwill was left between them. It confirmed Lewis's worst fear that Martin saw him as a meal ticket, not a friend. And it confirmed Martin's frustration that Lewis had become impossible to work with. The quote became the point of no return. After those words, there was no going back to what they had. The friendship, if it ever really existed, was dead. The power struggle that ended the partnership. The feud wasn't just about hurt feelings. It was about control. Lewis had started taking more creative control over their films. He wanted to direct and produce and shape their material. Martin just wanted to show up and perform and cash the check. That fundamental difference in approach created massive tension. Lewis felt like he was carrying the act, doing all the physical comedy, taking all the risks. Martin felt like he was being treated as replaceable furniture. The straight man role started to feel like an insult to him. Lewis would spend hours perfecting a bit while Martin wanted to keep it loose and spontaneous. By their later films, Lewis was essentially directing even when he wasn't credited. He'd tell Martin where to stand and how to deliver lines. Martin, who'd been a successful solo performer before the partnership, started to resent being bossed around by someone he considered less experienced. The billing order became another battleground with Lewis insisting his name come first. Martin's agents fought back, saying Dean was equally important to the act's success. Studio executives got caught in the middle trying to keep both stars happy. Lewis wanted the final cut on their films while Martin didn't care about editing. That indifference made Lewis feel like Martin didn't respect the work. Meanwhile, Martin saw Lewis's obsessiveness as proof he'd lost perspective. Lewis wanted approval and credit for his genius. Martin wanted respect for being the foundation that made Lewis's chaos work. Neither one could see the other's perspective. The partnership that looked effortless on screen required constant negotiation behind the scenes. And by 1956, neither of them wanted to negotiate anymore. Lewis later said, Martin became cold and distant. Martin later said, Lewis became an egomaniac who couldn't take direction. They were probably both right. The act depended on balance, and once that balance tipped toward resentment, it couldn't be saved. Paramount tried mediating between them, but gave up when both refused to compromise. The final straw was Lewis announcing he'd direct their next film without consulting Martin first. Martin saw it as the ultimate disrespect, and that's when he decided he was done. The final performance at the Copacabana. The split didn't land softly at all. Filming on Hollywood or Bust wrapped in June 1956, and stories of the end were already circulating in Hollywood trade papers. But contracts still owned them, so they had to finish what the money demanded. That included a farewell engagement at the Copacabana in New York that ended on July 25, 1956. Picture the scene. The audience is laughing and cheering and begging for encores, completely unaware of what's happening backstage. They're watching Martin and Lewis, the greatest comedy team in the world. Backstage is a cold room full of forced smiles and clenched jaws, and two men pretending the betrayal isn't happening. They performed their act one last time with the same chemistry and timing that made them famous. The jokes landed, the crowd roared, everything looked perfect from the audience's perspective. Then they walked off stage and never spoke again. The audience had no idea they were watching the ending of Martin and Lewis in real time. Staff at the Copacabana later said you could cut the tension with a knife between shows. Martin would stay in his dressing room. Lewis would pace the hallways. They'd meet on stage for their performance and then immediately separate. After that final night, the silence became the weapon they'd use against each other for 2 decades. Enjoying the video so far? Learn anything new from this story? Comment below if so. Now back to the video. 20 years of stubborn silence. Not a polite cooling off period where they'd eventually reconnect. A hard wall of complete silence. Over and over later, accounts repeat the same stubborn fact. They did not speak privately for about 20 years. Not because they lost touch, or because life got busy, or because they lived in different cities. Because the resentment turned into pride, and pride turned into a feud where neither man wanted to be the one who looked weaker by reaching out first. The feud ran on brutal fuel, credit and control and respect and money and ego. The act depended on Lewis detonating across the stage while Martin played the cool anchor. It made them rich, but it also built a trap they couldn't escape. Lewis could feel like the engine who did the heavy lifting and took the blame when anything went wrong. Martin could feel like the partner watching the spotlight drift, even though the chemistry was the whole product. When one guy is labeled the straight man, it can feel like being called replaceable. When the other guy is treated like the genius and the creative force, it can turn into entitlement. That imbalance doesn't stay on stage. It bleeds into contracts and creative decisions, and who gets blamed when a bit dies and who gets praised when the room explodes. Lewis went on to direct and star in his own films. Martin became a solo singing sensation and joined the Rat Pack. Both of them were successful without each other, which probably made the feud worse, because it proved they didn't need each other anymore. The partnership that defined them for a decade became something they actively avoided talking about. Interviewers learned not to bring up the other guy's name. Industry events became awkward when both were invited. Hollywood split into Martin people and Lewis people. The silence lasted through the 60s and into the 70s without either one cracking. The 1976 telethon ambush. Fast forward to September 5th, 1976. 20 years after the Copacabana, Jerry Lewis is hosting the Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon in Las Vegas, a live marathon broadcast where you're exhausted and emotional and exposed on camera for hours. The telethon was Lewis's baby, something he'd built into a massive annual event. He's deep into hour 20-something when Frank Sinatra walks out. The crowd goes nuts because Sinatra appearing is a huge deal. Then Sinatra pulls the nastiest surprise possible. He brings Dean Martin on stage, reportedly kept secret from people around them. Lewis freezes completely. His face goes white. A hot mic catches him muttering, "You son of a bitch," at Sinatra under his breath. He tries to play it off with a joke, but the shock is written all over his face, because this is the one person he had refused to share a moment with for 2 decades. And now it's happening live on national television with millions watching. Sinatra set this up knowing exactly what he was doing, forcing 2 stubborn friends to confront each other in the one place they couldn't escape. Lewis was already emotionally vulnerable from hours of telethon broadcast, begging for donations and telling sob stories about sick children. Sinatra had apparently planned this ambush for weeks without telling Lewis's team. The telethon producers later said they had no idea Martin was coming until minutes before it happened. Sinatra walked Martin through a back entrance to avoid anyone tipping off Lewis. The cameras captured every second of Lewis's genuine shock, which is why the moment feels so raw. You can see Lewis doing mental calculations trying to figure out how to handle this on live TV. His hands are shaking slightly as Martin walks toward him. The studio audience gasped audibly when Martin appeared because everyone knew the history. Then it's just the two of them standing there facing each other. No script can erase 20 years of damage and hurt. Lewis opens with a simple, "So how you been?" His voice cracks slightly. Martin answers with a calm smile that cuts because it's true. "You look great," Martin says. And then the kicker, "It seems like we haven't seen each other for 20 years. The crowd laughs because it wants relief from the tension. But the moment is tense underneath. It's not a reunion built on warmth or forgiveness. It's a reunion built on pressure and reputation, and a mutual friend forcing the issue in public where neither can say no. You can almost feel the secondhand discomfort through the screen. They exchange a few more pleasantries. They hug awkwardly. Martin's body language is stiff like he's hugging a stranger. Lewis holds on just a second too long like he's trying to convince himself this is real. The crowd eats it up, but anyone watching their faces can tell this isn't resolved. This is 2 professionals doing what's expected while the wound is still bleeding underneath. The encounter lasted less than 5 minutes before Martin walked off stage. Lewis immediately tried to return to the telethon business, but his voice was shaky for the next hour. Backstage crew members later said Lewis went to his dressing room during the next break and cried. The phones at the telethon reportedly went crazy with people calling to comment on the reunion, not the donations. The aftermath of the telethon. Even after that telethon moment, the friendship didn't instantly reboot. It stayed cautious and controlled and complicated for years, more symbolic than healed. The cameras captured a milestone, not a miracle. They'd broken the ice, but the freeze had lasted too long for things to just snap back to normal. They didn't start calling each other. They didn't have dinner. The public got what it wanted, a reconciliation moment, but privately the damage was still there. Both of them gave interviews afterward downplaying the significance. Martin said it was nice to see Jerry. Lewis said it was good to clear the air. But they weren't friends again. Not yet. The industry treated them like they'd reconciled, but the reality was more complicated. They'd acknowledged each other existed. That was progress, but it wasn't forgiveness. The wounds were too deep, and the silence had lasted too long. Industry insiders who knew both men said they still wouldn't take calls from each other. When they showed up at the same Hollywood events, they'd stay on opposite sides of the room. Frank Sinatra reportedly tried to get them together for dinner multiple times, and both refused. The telethon reunion became a conversation, but it didn't translate into actual friendship. People who worked with Martin said he still bristled when Lewis's name came up in conversation. Lewis would tell interviewers the telethon moment meant something, but never elaborated on what. The public narrative was reconciliation, but the private reality was two men still carrying 20 years of resentment. Even their closest friends couldn't get them in the same room together voluntarily. The real reconciliation. In 1987, Martin's son, Dean Paul Martin, lost his life in a plane crash during a military training exercise. He was just 35 years old. It was devastating for Martin, who'd already lost so much in his life. Lewis attended the funeral quietly without making a scene or alerting the press. He showed up to support his former partner during the worst moment of his life. Later accounts say Martin learned Lewis had been there and reached out to thank him, and the two finally spoke in a more human way without the cameras and the pressure and the public watching. That private moment away from the spotlight started the real healing. It took a tragedy to break through the pride and the hurt. In 1989, Lewis appeared for Martin's birthday celebration in Las Vegas with a cake and thanks. He even joked, "Why we broke up, I'll never know," which got laughs, but also felt sad, because by then, everyone knew exactly why they broke up. The joke was a way to acknowledge the absurdity of wasting 20 years. By then, the feud had burned so long that the truce itself felt unreal. Lewis later said he couldn't even watch their last film Hollywood or Bust because it was too painful. That detail matters because it means the breakup wasn't just headlines or show business drama. It left a bruise that didn't fade even after they reconciled. The hurt stayed with both of them until the end. Lewis's presence at the funeral was the first genuine gesture between them since 1956. Martin was reportedly moved to tears when he learned Jerry had been there. The funeral became what the telethon couldn't be, an honest moment between two broken men. They started speaking occasionally by phone after that. Nothing regular, but occasional check-ins. The birthday appearance in 1989 was Lewis's way of publicly showing the feud was over. Martin gave him a standing ovation, and the two embraced on stage, this time without cameras forcing it. Their final years weren't a return to the old friendship, but they were something real. Both men expressed regret in later interviews about the wasted decades. Even with that embrace, the silence between 1956 and the late 80s hung over them like a sentence that never ended. Friends around them knew the bitterness had hardened into habit, and neither man wanted to be the first to blink. By the time they finally talked again, it wasn't about fixing the past, because the past was already gone. It was just two aging legends admitting out loud what everybody else had known for years, that the funniest partnership in America died in misery, and they waited a lifetime to make peace. The truth behind the feud. That's the real truth of Martin and Lewis. Their breakup wasn't a gentle drifting apart or a business disagreement that got resolved. It was an emotional severing followed by 2 decades of stubborn silence, capped by a televised trap that forced them to face each other while the whole country watched. The $ quote became the symbol of everything that went wrong. It proved that even the biggest comedy team in the world couldn't survive when money replaced friendship. Martin felt underappreciated as the foundation of the act. Lewis felt used as the talent that made Martin look good. Both of them let pride keep them apart for 20 years of their lives. By the time they finally reconciled, they'd lost 2 decades they could never get back. The saddest part is they were both right about some things and wrong about others. But neither wanted to admit it until it was almost too late. Martin died in 1995. Lewis died in 2017. They had those final years of cautious friendship, but they could never get back what they lost. The partnership that made them both stars became the thing that destroyed their friendship. And that's the tragedy of Martin and Lewis. The feud cost them both more than they probably realized during those silent decades. They missed birthdays and weddings and family moments they could have shared. Martin's later years were marked by loneliness, and Lewis carried guilt about the wasted time. Both achieved success alone, but never recaptured the magic they had together. The entertainment world lost what could have been more classic collaborations. Their children children grew up knowing their fathers as enemies, not partners. The feud became a cautionary tale in Hollywood about ego-destroying genius. By the time they finally made peace, both men were old and tired and full of regret. The 20 years they wasted being stubborn became the thing neither could forgive themselves for. That televised reunion didn't heal anything overnight. It just exposed how deep the wound still was. You could see it in their eyes that the laughter was gone, and the history was heavier than the applause. Martin had built his identity on being the steady anchor, and he couldn't stand being treated like the background while Lewis got the spotlight. Lewis couldn't stand the idea that his chaos was the engine, and yet he was being blamed for the wreck when it finally crashed. Everyone around them kept talking about money, but the real damage was respect, credit, and who felt loved when the cameras turned off. And once that kind of hurt hardens, pride feels safer than forgiveness, even when it's ruining your life. That's why their story hits so hard, because the jokes were legendary, but the silence was even louder. Did you know the Martin and Lewis feud lasted this long? Were you surprised that Frank Sinatra had to force them back together on live television? The story proves that even the funniest partnerships can hide the deepest resentments, and that pride can cost you decades of friendship. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Hollywood's most famous and heartbreaking feuds, don't forget to subscribe for more classic entertainment history. And let us know if you like this style of content more than others on our channel so we can keep them coming.